This video is sponsored by Yellow Images. More about them later when we use their cool stuff. In this After Effects tutorial, we're going to make some marginally more advanced text animations. Think of this like Text Animators 102. We're taking one little step beyond the basics. We're going to explore 3 examples that will look at combining range selectors, combining animators, warping their easing, and we're going to touch a little bit on the Wiggly selector to explode some text. That one's my favorite. The main theme linking all of this stuff is that we're animating using the offset instead of the range. If those words don't make a lot of sense, don't worry. Hopefully after the first segment that covers all the theory you need to know, you're going to be just fine. I'm going to try my best to make this as beginner-friendly as possible, but if you have any questions, please do let me know in the comments and I'll try to help you out. And of course, if you like this tutorial, you want to see more like it, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any new ones when they come out around here. Now, I think if you looked at the examples long enough, let's talk about how to make them. The typical way we see text animated is picking a property from the animate menu, perhaps we'll use position here, and keyframing the start or end of the range to control how much or how little of the text is having that property change applied to it. I'm going to add the property of fill RGB so we can really see the change being applied to this line of ooze here. I'll adjust the range, pinching it in so it's being applied to a middle chunk of the text. And this is the basic mode most people begin with. We're going to take this further by using all of the settings you find in the advanced bin. So twirling in here, we see lots of stuff. How we might count the actual units we're measuring in, perhaps it's percent or index, what we're counting, words, characters, lines, but all of the stuff you find in here is about how that range is being treated and how that range might relate or combine with other ranges. Let's spend some time looking at shape, the most confusing property in my opinion, because how can any of this really have a shape? Well, right now it's set to square, and that means for the entire range, we're giving the same instructions, position and color change. Every character is getting the same amount of those changes. Let's change to triangle, and you can see that the middle of the range is getting all of the change, and towards the edges, less and less until none of the change is applied outside of the range. This is really similar to round and smooth, just different distributions of the change throughout the range. The other two, ramp up and down, are a little bit different. You can see how on one side of the range we have no change at all, and then we ramp up to have all of the change, and out the other side of the range selection, the text has all of that change applied. And ramp down implies the opposite, and would you look at that, it does it. We can refine these shapes even more with easing. Ease high and ease low will have dramatic impact on the look and movement. So why is it high and low? Well, imagine that the high point is all of the change being applied. So if we eased high, we're easing at that end of the change, or easing into 100% of the change being applied to the higher point. On the other end, the low would mean none of the change is applied, and that's where we're easing if we are easing low. With that in mind, here's how it impacts something like the triangle. Notice how the high point and low point aren't the start or end of the range. They are the highest and lowest percentage of the change being applied. Represented here as things being literally higher or lower because we're using a positional change. And with all that in mind, what would happen if we were to change the mode now from add to subtract? You can see that we can invert what the range means. And I know this is a lot to keep in your head in the abstract, so we should do something practical with this knowledge. And in particular, we are going to be animating not by growing or shrinking the ranges, but mostly by offsetting, combining, and shaping the ranges. And if we're going to be animating text, we should get our hands on some lovely fonts to use. Perhaps you'd enjoy some fonts from this video sponsor, Yellow Images. Yellow Images is the #1 marketplace for high-quality premium mockups, creative fonts, Images 360, and a creative store full of amazing graphical assets like brushes, presets, lettering, illustrations, patterns, textures, UI, UX kits, and much, much more. I've pulled a small selection of fonts from their massive creative store for us to work with, but they have so much more to offer. Lots of unique and beautiful typefaces you won't find anywhere else, so I highly recommend you have a look at what they have to offer. If you are a heavy user of stock assets, make sure you get yourself a yellow ticket and enjoy deep member discounts on everything they have to offer. It's kind of like a Costco card, but for stock assets, and right now, for a limited time, they're offering 20% off everything they sell if you use promo code ECA2022. So please take advantage of that using the link in the description today, and thanks again to Yellow Images for sponsoring these tutorials. First, let's look at this undulating loop. It might look complex, but once we see how it's made, there's not really that much to it. It's really just two eased ranges rolling on through with enough nuance in their easing and timing to make them blend together. When two animators interact, remember that both changes, or really all sets of instructions that are being given to the elements, are going to overlap each other. That means that we have nuanced control over different aspects of a block of text by overlapping animators, just like we would have nuanced movement over any element or layer by overlapping and offsetting their keyframes. To make this from scratch, I have this very classy font called Hollypop, and I'll just type out what we're doing. And then I'm going to apply a position and scale property change. I want this to be a smooth change, so I'll choose the smooth shape and then dial up my scale and position changes to get this thing jumping off of the baseline. I also need to modify the more options and change the grouping alignment to push that grouping into the middle center of each character. This helps me better control each letter, especially when scaling is involved. I'm going to go with a 200% vertical scale, and I'm compensating with the position to make it seem like it's growing. I'm going to animate the offset to push this through, offsetting from -100 and then all the way through to +100, setting keyframes for those changes. And now we have one change pushing on through. I want to make this loop endlessly, so I'm going to apply an expression, one that I think you should put on a sticky note or commit to memory because it is very useful. That is loopIn plus loopOut minus value. This will cause the animation to loop both in and out from the keys that we've set endlessly in either direction. It's a very useful thing to know. In order to set an expression on a property, you'll need to hold down Option and click on the little stopwatch icon. Then you can type in whatever you like into that field. Now we want the reverse animation. So I will simply duplicate that original animator, and we should rename them to maybe push up and push down so that we can keep them straight. Rename by simply selecting and pressing the Enter key, and now you can type whatever you like. You can actually rename just about anything in here, and I recommend you do to stay organized. To get the kind of bounce back response that I want to see, I'm going to just go in and get the position moving in the opposite way, but I want to keep the scale remaining the same so that we're pushing things down below the line. You can see right now that all this has done is to make the letters move back to the baseline and be way larger. This is because both animators are being applied to the text, and when they overlap, we've got things that are moving up by a certain number of pixels and growing by 200%, then they're moving down by the same number of pixels and growing by another 200%. So to get the movement I want, I simply need to offset the keyframes away from each other. From here, it's a lot of refinement, pushing the offset keys apart and together to get the desired feel of the movement. This is also a good time to play with the easing. I like to just type ease up in a little search field here so I can call up only the ease properties and I can look at fewer things to modify at a time. I'll speed this part of the tutorial up a bit while I dial it in, but I hope you can see that it's a little tweak here, a little tweak there, a little nudge, and eventually we get to something that we're looking for. So in the end, we've created this undulating loop using offsets and a couple of animators that combine in a very pleasing way. Here's an example where we're using a very similar method to make things bounce in, pushing many ramp up ranges through the text. So we'll start with some lovely lemon typeface. When life gives you lemons, cool, free lemons. But we want life to give us some text, so I'm going to animate this thing coming on using a ramp up shape, setting the scale to 0 and the rotation to 60. That's the change we want to propagate through using this ramp up shape. To bring this on, I'm going to dial in the range to only cover about 50% of the text, then I'll offset it to go from all the way off at -50% to all the way out the other side at 100%. I'm also going to set the easing to 80% on the low, so it has a good, sudden, poppy appearance from nothing. So now you can see that range is being pushed through. It's revealing our original text arrangement, its original properties, because we've now landed on the other side of the ramp up, which would be the downside, where 0% of that change is being applied. Now we need to bring in the wobble or the overshoot, that kind of thing that we can accomplish usually with some rotating and some scaling, making things go too large in one direction and then too small in the other direction to make kind of a springy response. So I will duplicate the original animator, call this one too big, and change that scale to be larger and the rotation to go in the opposite way, so it's countering that first movement. It's also set to ramp up and it's offsetting through, and I'm just going to adjust those keys so that they happen later and take a little bit longer. I'm also going to dial in the easing, coming in at 60 on the high and low, just to make the shape a little bit more pleasant and soft as it rolls through. I don't want hard edges to our shapes when we're doing bouncy, soft, cartoony stuff like this. It's looking okay so far, but let's add some more wobble here. I'll duplicate, change the scale and rotation to be smaller and going in the other way by about half from -20 to +10. And then let's rename this one to too small so we can keep track of everything. And the motion, again, will start a little bit later, take a little bit longer. We're going to ease a little bit less, maybe getting less eased as all the changes propagate through. And let's just play that through, see how we're feeling. Let's do one more bounce into the opposite direction, one more duplicating, changing the settings, scaling a bit too much, rotating a bit too far in the other direction. Then we'll work the easing, change the keyframes, continuing on in the same pattern. And how about this? We've achieved, again, some nuanced and interesting motion caused by overlapping animators, pushing in different directions, having slightly different changes. We're applying those basic principles of animation through the medium of text animators. Finally, let's look at this example of how two ranges can combine inside the same animator with explosive results. From our corpus of text, a lovely example of the Quicko display font, we want to add in position and rotation changes. And at first, this isn't going to make much sense. We're pushing the text at a diagonal, we're rotating it upside down. What are we doing? How is this even going to make a random explosion looking effect? Well, it all changes once we add a Wiggly selector. Remember back to how the range selector works. It's only expressing how much of the change should be applied to which elements of the text. Wiggly is doing that too, applying somewhere between -100 and 100% of our desired changes to the text. Now, I need to stop the undulations, so I'm going to bring the wiggles per second down. In fact, I'll drop it all the way to 0. But I still want some movement, but it's movement that I control. So I'm going to keyframe the spatial or temporal phase, so now I can keyframe some drifting or random movement in here. I'm also dropping the correlation down. This means how likely is it that two elements are going to behave similarly. At 100, everyone is doing the exact same thing. And at 0, no one is doing the same thing. That's probably the one that I want. And very critically, what is the mode of the selector? How does it interact with other selectors? It's currently set to intersect, which means it's only going to apply where the Wiggly and the range above it will intersect. That's where we'll see the changes. So if I were to shrink or grow that first range selector, that default range selector, you're going to see more or less of the text is getting wiggly. So to control this explosion being applied to the text, let's change that first range to be called adding, and we'll set that range to be the full width and the shape to be ramp down. Now we will offset that through, and you can see how it applies the explosion as it passes, as we're ramping down. Now we may want that explosion to come back together. So let's duplicate that first selector, change it to subtract mode, so it's going to be doing the opposite of the first thing. Then I'll move its offset to the end, so it's taking place then, and then we have something that's exploding and coming back together. Now it all needs to feel more explosive. So that's when we want to play with our easing. I'm going to go and search up ease in the properties. Let's ease high at the maximum amount when we're coming in, and we'll ease low when we're going out. And maybe I'll just play around with that a bit to see if I can get it exactly how I want. And that is looking pretty good now. And if you wanted, you might even have the objects explode randomly just by clicking the random order button. That's a fun look. Combining ranges and combining selectors makes for some pretty cool results. Now, hopefully looking at these examples and exploring their inner workings has given you insight into other ways you might animate with text animators. If anything, I hope it can shift you from animating by growing or shrinking the range and into thinking more about how we can make use of that offset property. If you've had any trouble with the concepts I talked about here, please do get at me in the comments, and I'll try to answer you when I'm able. And if you have any questions about other things, the best place to reach me is on Twitter or Instagram. I'm at ECAbrams in those places. And of course, if this is the kind of thing you like to learn, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications so you know when new things happen around here. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Evan Abrams. Stay creative, be kind to each other, and I'll see you all next time.